announcing the passing of my Aunt Dolly Rebecca Parton Dean, sister, sis, Aunt Granny to one generation and Gigi to the next.
Dolly Parton. The news hit like a sudden storm rolling over the Tennessee hills. On a quiet Tuesday in late August, the world learned that Dolly Rebecca Parton was gone. 80 years old. A life that had stretched from a one-room cabin beside the Little Pigeon River all the way to the brightest stages on earth. The announcement came not from a polished press release or a carefully staged statement, but from a simple video posted on her Instagram by the man who had spent more than 20 years watching over her. Her nephew, Brian Siver, looked into the camera and spoke the words she had asked him to deliver years earlier. Sister. Sis. Granny to one generation. Gigi to the next. The voice that had carried so many songs cracked under the weight of the moment. He said she was in the arms of Jesus now, reunited with Carl, with her parents, with all the ones who had gone before. Within minutes the tributes began. Flags were ordered to half-staff across the nation. Fans who had grown up on her music sat in silence. Fellow artists who had shared stages with her struggled for the right words. For a few days the country seemed to pause and remember the woman who had somehow remained both larger than life and somehow still one of them. Yet even as the world mourned the public Dolly, a quieter current began moving beneath the surface. Attention shifted toward the place she had guarded more carefully than any stage or red carpet. Willow Lake Plantation. The sprawling estate outside Nashville where she and Carl had built a private world no camera was ever meant to enter. Investigators were said to have taken a closer look at parts of the property. Details that had remained behind locked gates for decades suddenly became the subject of questions no one had expected to ask. Some of what turned up may have had ordinary explanations. Other pieces were harder to dismiss. The same woman who had spent a lifetime crafting an image of sparkling openness had also kept entire chapters of her life sealed away. And now those chapters were being examined in the harsh light that follows a death. What exactly waited inside those walls? Why had so much of it stayed hidden for so long? The answers, if they ever fully surface, will have to wait. First, the story has to return to where it began, because nothing about Dolly Parton makes sense without understanding the dirt road that carried her out of the mountains. She arrived in the world on a cold January day in 1946, the fourth of 12 children born to Robert Lee Parton and Avi Lee Owens. The cabin near Pittman Center was barely large enough for the family already living there. One room. A dirt floor in the early years. A wood stove that had to work overtime when the Appalachian winters settled in. Lee worked the land and took whatever construction jobs he could find. He never learned to read or write, yet Dolly would later say he was one of the smartest men she ever met. He understood people. He understood the value of a hard day's work and the cost of a promise broken. Avi Lee held the household together with songs and stories older than any of them. Mountain ballads. Family tales passed down like heirlooms. On nights when the wind rattled the thin walls, the children would gather and listen. Music was not entertainment in that house. It was oxygen. Poverty was not abstract. It was the feel of shoes that never quite fit. It was the knowledge that the doctor who delivered Dolly had been paid with a sack of cornmeal because cash simply did not exist. Dolly never soft-pedaled those facts. She turned them into songs instead. The struggles became verses. The resilience became choruses. When the family eventually moved to a modest two-room farmhouse on Locust Ridge, the landscape itself seemed to imprint itself on her. Rolling hills. Woods that changed color with every season. A place small enough to know every tree and large enough to dream beyond. Years later the memory of that ridge would pour out of her in My Tennessee Mountain Home, a song that still carries the scent of wood smoke and the sound of distant church bells. Church was central. Faith was not a performance. It was the framework that kept the family upright when money ran out and illness arrived. Dolly sang in church as a child of 6. By 8 she had a real guitar, a gift from an uncle that felt heavier and more important than any toy. She taught herself the chords. She practiced until her fingers hurt. Something inside her already knew the mountains would not be enough. While other teenagers still wondered what the future held, Dolly graduated from Sevier County High School in 1964 and left for Nashville the very next day. She packed what little she owned and stepped onto a bus carrying nothing but determination and a voice that had already learned how to cut through noise. Nashville in 1964 did not open its arms immediately. Talent was everywhere. Opportunity was rationed. Dolly had already tasted a little of the business. At 10 she had appeared on the Cass Walker Show out of Knoxville. At 13 she had recorded Puppy Love and stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, where Johnny Cash offered her the kind of advice that stays with a person forever. Trust your own instincts. Do not let anyone else decide who you are going to be. She carried that advice into Music City like a talisman. She found early work as a songwriter. Signed with Combined Publishing. Wrote with her uncle Bill Owens. Songs began appearing on the charts under other people's names. The industry noticed the young woman from the Smokies had a gift for putting truth into 3-minute packages. Then came the frustrating detour. Monument Records signed her in 1965 but tried to push her toward bubblegum pop. Her high soprano, they believed, did not fit the country sound they understood. Dolly pushed back the only way she knew how. She kept writing. One of her compositions became a country hit, and the label finally allowed her to record the music she actually wanted to make. In 1967 she released her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly. The title itself felt like a quiet declaration. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. The real acceleration arrived when Porter Wagoner invited her onto his nationally syndicated television show. On paper the opportunity was perfect. Exposure. A weekly platform. A chance to stand beside an established star. In practice it was bruising. Dolly was replacing Norma Jean, a performer the audience already loved. Crowds chanted for the woman who was no longer there. Week after week Dolly walked onto that stage knowing a portion of the room wished she would disappear. She did not disappear. She stayed. She sang. She slowly turned the temperature in the room. Wagoner helped her secure a deal with RCA Victor. Their first duet reached the country top 10 in 1968. A partnership formed that would produce years of hits and years of tension. By the early 1970s Dolly's solo work was gaining ground, yet her identity still felt partially borrowed. The decision to record Mule Skinner Blues changed the trajectory. The song climbed to number 3. Then Joshua became her first #1 country single. The woman who had spent years sharing the spotlight was suddenly holding it alone. Hits followed. Recognition outside pure country circles grew. And then came the professional break that would echo for the rest of her career. In 1974 she left Wagoner's show. The separation was painful. It also produced one of the most enduring songs she ever wrote. I Will Always Love You reached #1 on the country chart. When Elvis Presley expressed interest in recording it, Dolly was thrilled until she learned the price. Colonel Tom Parker wanted half the publishing rights. She said no. It was a calculated risk for a young songwriter who could have used the enormous platform Elvis represented. She kept her ownership. That decision would prove worth far more than any single recording session. The late 1970s and 1980s saw her cross over in ways few country artists had managed. Here You Come Again brought a Grammy. 9 to 5 became both a country and pop phenomenon and a film that introduced her to audiences who had never set foot in a honky-tonk. She collaborated with Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt on Trio, proving she could still command attention even as the industry shifted around her. Through it all she refined a public image that was impossible to ignore. Big hair. Rhinestones. An exaggerated femininity she leaned into rather than fought. She joked about the plastic surgery. She refused to pretend the look was entirely natural. Beneath the glitter lived a sharp understanding of branding long before the word became common currency. She knew exactly how she wanted to be remembered, and she controlled the narrative with precision. Yet the most carefully protected part of her life was the man who never sought the spotlight. Carl Thomas Dean. They met on Dolly's first day in Nashville. She had arrived with dirty clothes and almost no time to waste, so she headed to a laundromat. A man called out to her on the street. Dolly, raised to speak to nearly everyone she met, waved back. Carl later said the thought hit him almost immediately. He was going to marry that girl. She was beautiful. Dolly had no idea the random greeting would become the longest relationship of her life. He began visiting the house where she was staying with her aunt and uncle. They sat on the porch and talked. She would not invite him inside at first. Caution ran deep. Eventually he took her to meet his parents, already certain. 2 years later they married in a quiet ceremony at a Baptist church in Ringgold, Georgia, on May 30, 1966. The pastor, the pastor's wife, and Dolly's mother were among the handful present. No celebrity spectacle. No elaborate honeymoon. They both had to work the next day. That small beginning grew into one of the most enduring marriages in entertainment. Carl never wanted the celebrity life. He stayed home. He avoided cameras. Dolly protected that boundary fiercely. By 1981 rumors circulated that the husband might not even exist. She dismissed them with characteristic directness. He was real. He was private. Their differences were part of the glue. She lived in motion. He preferred stillness. Humor, she said, kept the sharp edges from becoming permanent wounds. They gave each other space. During the early years a red-haired bank teller developed a crush on Carl. Dolly noticed how often he found reasons to visit the bank. Instead of nursing a private grudge, she turned the feeling into Jolene. The real situation, she later clarified, was far more innocent than the song's dramatic storyline, but the emotional truth of wanting to protect what mattered had been real enough. The full picture of what was found may never be completely public. Much of it appears to have remained deliberately out of the spotlight. What is certain is that the woman who rose from a one-room cabin to become one of the most recognizable figures in American culture never stopped guarding the parts of her life that belonged only to her and to the people she loved. The music remains. The films remain. The philanthropy remains. The sparkling public image remains. And somewhere behind the gates of a Tennessee estate, the quieter story of how she actually lived continues to raise questions that the world is only beginning to ask. In the end, the arc of Dolly Parton's life feels almost too complete to be real. From cornmeal payments and homemade guitars to sold-out arenas and a business empire. From a chance meeting outside a laundromat to a marriage that lasted nearly 60 years. From a young girl singing in a mountain church to an icon whose passing lowered flags across a nation. She dreamed herself out of one corner after another, and even near the finish she was still talking about the work left to do. The private world she built at Willow Lake was the one place the dream could rest. Now that place has become the final chapter of a story that never stopped surprising the people who thought they already knew her. The songs will keep playing. The questions will linger. And the woman who taught an entire generation that you can be both glittering and grounded leaves behind a silence that still feels full of her voice.